Hello, everybody. My name is Anika, and my pronouns are she, her. And our first question today is, what is your name and what is your role in the women's health space or menstrual health space?
Yeah, so I'm Marybec Griffin. My pronouns are she, her. And my role is I am an assistant professor at Rutgers University. And I am somebody who is just infinitely curious about a lot of things, but especially women's health, women being very inclusive terms. So cis women, trans women, people who are non-binary, um, and just like advocating for the health needs of people with uteruses and people who experience the world through a very femme lens, and creating opportunities for people to access the healthcare services they need to talk about things like menstrual health, menstrual stigma, abortion care, contraceptive needs, um, just the daily oppression of the patriarchy because it's literally everywhere all of the time. Yeah, so just like trying to be there to facilitate these conversations and get people thinking about gender and sex in a kind of regular and routine way.
Awesome. And when did you first get involved in this space?
So I think I always say that like my origin story is with the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So going back to like the mid 1980s. So I am a person who was born in the year 1980. And so I watched the HIV/AIDS epidemic unfold on TV. And so obviously that was an epidemic that was more concentrated with queer men, but really seeing that it touches this intersection of gender identity, sexual orientation, and sex, right? Like this is how the virus primarily was transmitted, primarily is transmitted, and just like people wanting to express this very like innate thing about our humanity, like our sexuality, and to have these experiences and realizing that shame and fear and stigma are preventing actual real conversation that provides people education and information and allows them to express who they are. I think that more than anything is kind of where it started. And then like realizing that that means that if we're talking about sex and preventing HIV, then obviously we're talking about condoms, which then leads to pregnancy prevention. So very much kind of coming at it that way, that people should be having the sex that they want to have, as long as it is consensual and it is with people who are able to consent. That like, there is no like normal is a spectrum and you can experience your sexuality in any kind of way. Um, and then the period stuff, like the menstrual health stuff, is relatively new, but it's always something that's kind of been in the back of my mind. And I got hooked up a couple of years ago with the co-founder of Dr. Period Hackers, the organization that we work with, that we created. It's a menstrual health education. And my partner, Bethany, is a hematologist out in Oregon. And we were connected by a high school friend of mine who doesn't know Bethany, just saw her on Twitter, like tweeting about period poverty, and was like, hey, my friend Marybec from high school also talks about this all the time. You two should meet. So we had a Zoom 2.5 years ago, and here we are. Yeah, just like wild the way the internet works. So be nice to your high school friends because one day, like 20 years later, they're going to do something that like fundamentally changes your life.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Shout out to Stephen Anfield, who's my high school friend,
Mhm.
who's the one that connected us.
Wow. And obviously you've been in this space for a while. So what do you think is the biggest challenge you've faced so far in terms of both like identity and reproductive health issues?
Uh, it's getting people to understand that it's a real thing, right? That like identity issues affect everything and that they are insidious. And when we see policies that systematically disenfranchise people of trans experience, people who are non-conforming, gender non-conforming, um, anything that diminishes our role around our sexual nature and our sexual being and engaging in sexual activity, things like your doctor being able to refuse abortion services, and the change obviously with Dobbs that happened, the Dobbs decision, the Supreme Court decision, or doctors being like, I'm not going to prescribe birth control to you because you shouldn't be having sex because you're young or you're not married, or I'm going to deny gender affirming care because my morals and ethics don't allow me to do that. It's really insidious and it creeps in and it makes people think, oh, maybe there is something wrong with me. And there's never anything wrong with you expressing who you truly are, and how you want to navigate the world. So it's really combating that shame and that stigma. And it's really easy for people to be like, oh, well, that's not a real issue, or oh, there are bigger issues. So I think it's getting people to realize that it's valid, and that these things impact our daily lives, and they make us feel less than, and they make us feel like we don't have a place that we belong. And whenever we're talking about that, we're talking about reinforcing internalized shame and stigma, which means that then we're not getting the help and the information that we need. So I think that's like for both, for gender stuff and like identity stuff, and everything else, right? And then, if we're not disclosing our identities to our doctors, then we're not getting the care that we need, because then we're probably also not disclosing like the behaviors that we're engaging in, whether it be sex or substance use or mental health needs, right? So whenever there's a quote that I really like, by the comedian Hannah Gadsby, where she talks about shame being a seed that's planted from the outside in. And I think that's really true. It's a thing that society gives us that we didn't ask for, and that we have to then spend the rest of our lives trying to undo and to unlearn.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, everyone should check out her special Nanette that's on Netflix. It had like trigger warning. She talks about some very, very heavy things. And I remember crying through it, and then immediately texting like 20 of my friends at like 4 a.m. when I was done. I was like, you have to see this. It's so powerful.
Wow. Oh, I
Yeah.
will definitely check it out.
Oh, please do.
Although there probably isn't like a be all end all cure, what do you think would make the reproductive health space more inclusive?
I think it's being able to talk about these things, right? And then realizing that just because we maybe identify a certain way doesn't mean that that label that we are sharing is all encompassing of the sexual behaviors that we might engage in, right? There's a lot of research that says that doctors make these like these very dangerous assumptions. Like if somebody goes in and says, oh, I'm a lesbian, they're like, oh, well, this person doesn't need birth control. But that's not true. Like people use birth control for a lot of different reasons. Um, Obviously pregnancy prevention, but like hormone regulation and things like that. And just because you identify one way doesn't mean that you only engage in sexual activity with people who also have a vulva. So it's about undoing some of these provider assumptions about what we need. And then again, being able to create the space where you can just share these things and have physicians who are open-minded and aren't going to be like, "Ooh, why are you doing that? Why would you make that decision?"
Definitely. And along these lines, could you evaluate the importance of better reproductive and sexual education in communities? Also, maybe describing some of the current feelings you've noticed?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think obviously medically accurate sexual education and comprehensive and inclusive of all gender identities and all sexual orientations and whatever type of sex people might want to be engaging in is absolutely critical. So, I grew up in Alabama. It's where I went to high school, and the sex ed there was definitely lacking. And it's one of those things where it was just very much like, don't have sex, you'll get pregnant. I was like, okay, but that's not always true. Like, could you tell me more about my menstrual cycle? And that's just things that like we don't know. And I trained a couple of years ago to become a doula. And as somebody who is like intimately involved in doing research on this, there were still things through my doula training that I was like, I did not know that about my own menstrual cycle. Just like absolutely wild things that I was like, I should have known that. Why did nobody teach me this? So I think, educating both people who have the capacity to menstruate and people who don't have the capacity to menstruate about what a period is would be really, really helpful, because not everyone that menstruates uh, gets to make laws around menstrual health and things like period poverty and taxes for tampons and pads and things like that. Um, and then providing information about people who are perhaps in same-sex relationships, what that looks like, how to have safe anal sex, how to enjoy that, the preparations that you can take, the need for lube, things like that. Talking about sex toys would be fantastic, and allowing people to move not just from like, here's how to prevent disease, but here's how to enjoy sex, here's how to bring pleasure and center pleasure into the conversation. And then for people who are gender nonconforming or trans identified, talking about ways that you can affirm your gender while you're engaging in sex, maybe alternate names for different body parts. And then presenting all of this information in a medically accurate way so that we're not using stigmatizing language, especially if we're bringing things like abortion, which should be talked about in sex ed. We should have the full range of pregnancy options that we are talking about. I think, some of the failings are that we just don't do this. And parents think that schools are going to provide this education, and schools think that parents are going to provide the education, and there is no national curriculum about what has to be included in sex ed. And some states actually mandate through their state laws medically inaccurate information to be provided. So how can you expect people to know facts if the things they are being told, if they're being told things, are then not medically accurate?
Definitely.
Yeah.
That could be very problematic if people are not, if not
Right.
like not being told like anything, being told the wrong thing.
Right. Well, because then what do people do is they then obviously go to their peers. And I remember being like a 12-year-old and being like, well, I have questions around sex and pregnancy and how to prevent this. And my parents were not talking to me about this, at least not yet. And I wasn't getting this information in school. And like I said, I was born in 1980. So this was like pre-internet. And what my mom was going to drive me to the library to and then I was going to sit there with an encyclopedia. No. So what I did is I asked my friends, and I'll never forget the information that they gave me was like, well, if you have sex with person A and then you have sex with person B, you can't get pregnant. You have to have sex with person A 2 times in a row to get pregnant. And I was like, that seems wrong, but I also don't know. But for anyone out there who's listening who does not know, you do not have to have sex with the same person consecutively to get pregnant. You can get pregnant by anybody at any time. So that is absolutely not true. But this was the information I was getting. So then what I did was I was turning to things like songs on the radio. So like Salt and Pepper's Let's Talk About Sex, where they were talking about condoms, or TLC, and they were wearing condoms as part of their costumes when they were getting up and performing. And I was like, okay, like here is where I can get those messages. But I was turning to music and TV and like images in the media, which are sometimes good, but not always good. And sometimes are not also medically accurate. But again, when a person wants the information, they will find a way to get that information. The danger is that we have so much information at our fingertips that we can find the information with the bias that we want to find.
That's
So
really interesting.
yeah.
That's really true.
Yeah, like whatever bias you have, you can find something on the internet now to confirm it. So
100%.
yeah.
And we've discussed this earlier, but how does the COVID pandemic still exacerbate both period poverty and I guess like all of this just entire like reproductive health space?
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the benefits of the pandemic was there are two things. One, we were seeing an expansion of telehealth. So people being able to just get medical care from their homes because we weren't going to hospitals and things like that because we were risking infection. And we've now seen the Biden administration roll back those the services that were covered that insurance was required to cover that were telemed services. So where that then impacts things like period poverty for people who either can't take time off of work or then would need maybe childcare to then go to a medical provider. So that obviously exacerbating period poverty. So like there was like a moment during the pandemic where things got more equitable. And it's like we found a way not to be ableist, not to be classist. And then we had the opportunity to continue that. And we as like a country were like, no, we're good. We're going to go back to the way it was. And it was like, oh, but like some of this was actually really beneficial.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think that the pandemic did is that it got us talking about things like wearing masks and who we were hanging out with and when we had last been tested. And all of that is exactly the conversation that we need to be having around reproductive health. A face mask is just a condom for your face. So asking like, how often do you wear masks is the exact same skill set that we need to ask our partners. Do you use condoms when you have sex with people? How many people have you been hanging out with? Because I'm worried about the transmission of COVID. Exact same thing as like, Are you having concurrent partners? I would just like to know this. How long ago were you tested for COVID and what was that test result? Same exact conversation, same exact sentence and phrasing as when was the last time you were STI tested? And so we all as a society got really comfortable asking these questions in the context of COVID. So it's like we have those skills now and we're comfortable with that. And I think I was hoping that it would transition more into sexual and reproductive health conversations with partners or potential partners. And it hasn't really materialized in the way that I was hoping. But it's like we all have these skills. And so I'm hoping now, like if we talk about it enough, we can be like, oh yeah, I was fine asking people like who was in their bubble. Why am I not okay asking who their bubble is sexually?
That's interesting. That's a really interesting take. I like that. How has your own identity shaped your interest and work in this space?
Yeah. So I am a queer woman. So I think about everything kind of through that lens. I am a cisgender woman. So sort of like my default is like, how does this impact me as a person with a uterus, with a vulva who has the capacity to menstruate, who has the capacity to become pregnant, and who is making laws about my body and what I can do with my body? So it's kind of the first thing that I filter through. And then being a queer person, I'm always like, okay, but now how are they trying to deny my identity as someone who's like pansexual? I identify as queer, but like pansexual. How are they taking away my rights? How are they taking away the rights of my friends and family to like be able to express who they actually are and what that looks like? And how we can experience and enjoy life. Like, I mean, experience and enjoying life is kind of, it almost feels like a utopia when every single day people's rights and ability to survive are being taken away. And we see hate crimes that are committed against people of trans experience, non-binary individuals, women, people who are sexually active, people who are part of the LGBTQ umbrella, LGBTQIA umbrella, and people who are trying their best to just exist, and they're having their identities systematically harmed on a daily basis. So like, getting to actual pleasure seems like such a far off goal. So yeah, like that's sort of that's the way I filter everything and I sort of think about it. And I am a person then that has a fair amount of power and a fair amount of privilege, being a person who has gone to college, who has a PhD, and can then advocate and use my platform to just talk about the things that I want to talk about and the way that I want to see the world change and be shaped. And so if I can use my voice and can help other people find their voices to do the same kinds of work to make the actual real change and make the world the way I would like to see it, then it is my absolute honor and privilege to get to do that.
Wow. Like, what role can you see technology playing in reproductive justice?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think technology is a really useful thing, because we all have access to phones and to social media and to things like that. And again, we've talked about earlier, like you can find whatever bias you want, whatever misinformation you want, but we've never been more empowered. We've never had so much information literally at our fingertips. Anything you want to know is right there. And the ability to share those messages and to create content that is relatable, that can then be spread the world over in a matter of minutes is unendingly powerful. And it's a way that we can fight back against society that's very like hierarchical and top down, places that are making, like the federal government making laws about abortion and collecting menstrual health data and denying trans affirming care to young people. These are things that we can then speak out on and be advocates around in a very simple, easy way where we don't have to even really like be out there in the streets marching, because that's not always safe for people. So there's a way that we can get the message out. And then also it's a way that if you want this information and you don't feel comfortable asking a provider or a parent or a partner for it, that you can find it in a private and anonymous way. So that way, like you can sort of figure things out for yourself and create a scaffolding of safety before you then present your identity or your questions to the larger world. So again, always thinking about our own safety, autonomy, consent, and things like that.
Definitely. And along this vein, like, what is the role of science and empirical fact in achieving reproductive justice and menstrual equity?
Yeah, so I mean, huge. Science is something that must be believed because it's fact, it's impartial. I've been parts of research projects where I was like, oh, I wish that wasn't the thing that I found because I don't agree, but like this is what the data is telling me. Um, so doing that and then basing all of our actions in something that is scientific is something that cannot be taken away from us. People might feel differently. They might have different moral or ethical beliefs, but you can't argue with scientific fact because it is, in fact, fact. And there is strength in numbers, and there is strength in the empirical human experience of I have experienced this. I have experienced violence or period poverty or what it is like to not be able to get reproductive health care, or this is what it is like for me as a person of color. I'm not a person of color, but saying it as if I was a person of color or a queer person, and sharing our experience, right? Because we tend to think of like science as empirical and numbers, but human experience is equally as valid, and we like to diminish that, which is also something that I would love to see change completely, because if the person has experienced it, it is a thing, and it is a thing that exists within society, and we need to confront it. I think also then knowing the racist legacies of the reproductive health movement and reproductive health sphere. I'm talking about Marion J. Sims, the father so-called modern day gynecology, who experimented on Black enslaved women, again, in my home state of Alabama, without proper consent, without proper medical considerations and things like that. And he was lauded and had a statue in Central Park until I think 2017, 2018, right? As this person who changed fundamentally our reproductive health knowledge. But that knowledge should never have come with the exploitation of Black and femme bodies, and specifically Black femme bodies. Or Margaret Sanger and the birth control pill. Again, undeniable technology that we all benefit from. But she had a eugenicist past, and she was developing these techniques and the pill to control the fertility of populations that she didn't think should be having high fertility rates. Again, populations of color, Black people, Black populations, Black women, Hispanic women, Latina women, things like that. And then the history and legacy of testing the pill in Puerto Rico and other STI experiments that were conducted, like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment in Alabama, other ones that are happening in Guatemala and things like that, where people in the reproductive health field are exploiting bodies of color for scientific knowledge because they think that people of color are less than or somehow less human, which is, of course, absolutely fundamentally not true. So knowing the history and the legacy of the development of sexual and reproductive health technology is incredibly important. And it's something that we all have to sit with and confront. And you can't ignore it, right? It is part of this. And like this, I love sexual and reproductive health. It is what I've dedicated my life to, but you can't move to justice if you ignore the past.
Wow, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Again, I guess along the same vein, how do cycles of poverty oppress people who bleed, and to what extent could we help people escape these debilitating cycles?
Yeah, I mean, so not having access to menstrual products for people who have the capacity to menstruate means that they are facing either using products that are unsanitary, that are not washed, like if you're using old rags or leaves or things like that, means that you are then risking infection of your reproductive tract, which then holds you back from educational opportunities or economic and employment opportunities as well. But even if we're talking about, it's like, so I will come back to that point. So like put a pin in that idea. Or, people just not being able to afford menstrual supplies, which means that, again, they might be missing days of school, and things like that. And I think also recognizing that period poverty looks different in different cultural contexts. The experience of women or people who have the capacity to menstruate in African countries or Southeast Asian countries or Latin, Central, and Southern American countries is different than the period poverty that is faced by people in the United States or in Europe. Both are equally as valid. They just look different. And pitting period poverty against one another and being like, oh, well, that's that's not as bad as this. Perhaps, but it is still people's experience, and the cost of menstruation and not being able to afford products then costs over your lifetime. So I think, things like in a Western context, removing tampon taxes, like it costs $5,000 over a person's lifetime to just menstruate and capture the blood in tampons or pads, right? And for a lot of people, that's a real barrier. In Western contexts, also looking at menstruating while in jail or prisons and the lack of dignity that people who are experiencing incarceration feel and experience around their menstrual cycles, and not being able to afford menstrual products in prisons is a really important thing, right? And that's just another kind of offshoot of period poverty in more Western societies. And then thinking about how did we then get menstrual collection devices to more rural communities where period poverty looks a lot different. So like it's all equally valid. It just looks different. Okay,
Um,
yeah.
how could you urge people to get involved in social issues and personally relate to issues that may not directly impact them?
So I think there is a role for everybody. What I like to tell people is find the thing that makes you angry and then work towards that, right? I read the news and I hear about things like abortion access being taken away, or people not being able to get gender affirming care, or people who are denied things because they menstruate, right? And it makes me angry every day. And so instead of just being angry, I turn that anger into advocacy work where I will talk about it, where I just like will be very, very annoying in a very, very nice way. And just, I will not shut up about it. So I think that's the first key, is find something that you are passionate about, whatever that is, and just start speaking about it passionately, because passion is contagious. When you are excited about something, even if it's because it makes you angry, other people will listen to that. Excitement and passion is undeniable, and it is something that is contagious. And then people will listen to your message, and they will get education, and then that will naturally spill over, and they will then encompass that. Like they will take that on in their lives and then pick up the mantle of talking about it and being advocates itself. So never suppress yourself and anything that you're passionate about. Be louder. Don't let them not listen to you. Don't let them silence your voice. The world will try to silence you in so many ways. Do not allow them to do it without fighting back.
Wonderful.
And share the things you're passionate about. Like I love talking about menstruation and blood, and people are like, I'm like, maybe this makes me weird, but like I don't care. And so many people are like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. That's so cool. I'm now going to then share this. And I'm like, yes.
Wow. So,
Okay.
what does stigma mean to you?
To me, stigma is anything that makes me feel like I am not normal, right? Or that my experience is somehow different or shameful, right? Normal is not a single point. Normal is a range, and you can experience anything within that like range, right? So yeah, stigma is just somebody telling me that like I'm not good enough, or I'm not okay, or the thing that I'm doing is weird, which no, like it's not.
Right. Another question, number 13. Do you have any particularly entertaining life stories pertaining to this topic? So we've heard people like walking down the street in like tampon costumes, or someone like had never seen like a pad dispenser in their life, and they walked into the bathroom and was like, "What is that?" So anything along those lines?
um I mean, well, there was the one that I shared earlier about my friends and how you get pregnant. So I think that is definitely one of them. But I'll never forget, I was fully 35 and working at the health department, and just had a leak. Like my pad failed, and I was like walking around the rest of the day with like period blood on the back of my dress, and people were like, oh, did you know that like you should go do something? And I was like, what am I going to do? I don't have a change of clothes. If I like go wash the stain out of my dress, then my dress is going to be wet, and I'm going to look like I've like urinated on myself. So like I'm just going to walk around, like this is a thing that happens. Bodies bleed. Like I'm just gonna be here and own it, and it is what it is, and I could be embarrassed about it. And there was definitely like a moment where I was like kind of ashamed, and then I was like, you know what, this is what my body does, and people should confront the fact that bodies bleed. And I also think that it's super cool that people with the capacity to menstruate bleed every single month and we don't die. And it's like the coolest thing. I'm like, yes, because for some like bodies that don't menstruate, blood loss is something that is associated with death. But for bodies that can menstruate, you're like, no, I bleed every month. It's cool. Like, watch me be powerful.
That's a nice point. If you are comfortable sharing, what are your future plans in this space? Do you have any exciting projects coming up ahead?
Yeah, so many exciting things. So Dr. Period Hackers is doing a series of sexism and science lectures for the Vagina Museum in London. They will be virtual, so that's really cool. I am working with my friend Eleanor, who is a researcher in Australia, and we're looking at representations of femininity in slasher films, which then brings up some menstrual stuff as well. So like horror films, which I'm super, super excited about. I'm working on a special collection for the Journal of Women's Health that is just about menstrual health research. I'm working with a couple of really, really brilliant doctoral students to write their dissertations around menstrual health as well. And I was just selected to be an associate editor for the Sage Journal of Encyclopedia, the Sage Encyclopedia of Menstrual Health.
Well,
So some
congratulations.
really like cool, yeah, like all of a sudden my life is just about like blood and horror films. And also Eleanor and I with our slasher film project are doing a series of lectures at the Morbid Anatomy Museum as well that'll be online.
Cool.
So yeah, like really cool things. And I'm like, yes, I'm gonna put like on my resume that I work like doing stuff for the Vagina Museum and the Morbid Anatomy Museum. And I get to do these things with my friends and other people who just want to talk about blood.
That's so fun.
Yeah, it's so cool. I love I'm love that like my life is centered around blood now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. It's been like a weird and long journey to get to this niche. And I'm just so excited that this is my little home that I get to live in.
Totally. And question number 15, what are your words of wisdom?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think I've already said like find something that you love doing and commit your life to that. You can be passionate about things and find ways to create economic stability for yourself. There's no shame in economic stability. And something that I wish that I knew when I was younger is that these decisions that happen, especially like high school, college, feel like they're really, really big. And they are, but there is no wrong decision, right? There's just the path that you take to get where you are going to be. I did not think that I would take the path that I've taken to get a PhD, to be a researcher, to work on my cool like blood stuff. And it was just like a series of me saying yes to opportunities that presented themselves. But I definitely spent a lot of time being anxious and being like, well, what if this is the wrong step? There's no wrong step. There is no right way to get where you want to go. There is just the way that you choose to get there and the time that it takes for you to get there. And along the way, you'll have some really, really cool experiences. So if you can, if it's possible, and I know that my younger self would not have believed this, but like, it'll be okay. Everyone's going to get where they want to be. And it'll be fun to kind of see how you get there.